Her nephew forged her signature. His wife booked showings while Estelle still lived upstairs. They told buyers she was old and fading fast. Estelle, retired librarian and great-aunt, stayed quiet. By the time they staged the dining room, she'd already bought the house back, through a proxy they never saw coming. They were family by blood. But when they came for her home, the deed proved otherwise. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The late afternoon light slanted across the living room floor, casting golden strips through the sheer curtains Estelle had ironed that very morning. Dust motes floated in the stillness, like dandelion seeds suspended in time. From her wingback chair in the corner, Estelle sat quietly, a worn hardcover copy of Wuthering Heights open in her lap, but untouched for the last 20 minutes. The voices drifting in from the front hallway had taken her attention hostage. She didn't need to lean in or strain to hear. The acoustics of the old house, high ceilings, wide doorways, polished hardwood, carried every sound with almost deliberate clarity. Darren's voice came first, smooth and confident as ever. "This is original oak flooring pre-war, and these fixtures, hand-restored. Nothing in the new builds matches this kind of craftsmanship." A woman's voice responded with polite awe, the kind of sound people make when they're trying to imagine their future in someone else's memories. A man chimed in after her, probably her husband. Young couple, maybe late 20s, possibly looking for their first place, Estelle guessed. She'd seen them arrive through the side window, walking with the soft, bouncy steps of people who thought buying a home would feel romantic instead of contractual. Then came Carla's voice. Close. Too close. "She's old," she whispered, just beyond the archway near the stairwell. "She won't last long." There was a brief pause, as if even Darren hadn't expected her to say it quite that bluntly. But then he chuckled, quietly but not softly. "We'll flip this fast," he said with casual cruelty. "Title's all but ours anyway." Estelle didn't move, not a flinch, not a sigh. But her fingers curled slowly around the armrest of her chair, pressing into the velvet like she was testing its ability to hold her weight. Her heart beat steadily, but she felt something shift inside her, an almost imperceptible turn of gears that hadn't moved in years. Something old, but not rusted. Something dangerous in its patience. Upstairs, just along the railing of the landing, a shadow moved. Tasha stood half out of view, earbuds dangling around her neck, textbook still clutched in one arm. Her expression was unreadable at first, but then her eyes dropped toward her great-aunt, and something inside her sharpened. She had heard it, too. Estelle met her gaze and gave a nearly invisible nod, not of reassurance but of understanding. It wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated. It was just the first time they'd done it so openly. Later that evening, long after the young couple had driven away, and Carla's clicky heels had finally stopped echoing down the porch steps, Estelle stood alone in her bedroom. The overhead light was off, and the amber glow of her reading lamp lit only part of the room, casting the rest in hushed shadow. She walked slowly to the foot of the bed and knelt beside it, lifting the edge of the quilt with deliberate care. The trunk was still there, heavy, square, and older than anything else in the room. The brass corners were dulled with age, and the lock was hidden beneath a strip of quilted fabric. She peeled it back and retrieved a small silver key taped beneath the slats of the bed frame, a precaution she'd learned from her father decades ago and never once had reason to regret. The lock clicked open with a soft metallic sigh. The hinges groaned faintly as she lifted the lid, revealing the layers inside. Family photos, neatly labeled tax records, and a thick manila folder resting between flannel sheets. The label read, in her late husband Harold's careful block lettering, Estelle, Home Deed and Estate Materials. She carried the folder to the bed and opened it slowly. The first page was the deed to the house, complete with the date of transfer, her full name in black ink, and the official seal from the county registrar. Her name wasn't beside Darren's. It wasn't under Carla's. It was alone, sole title holder, full authority. Halfway down the document was the clause Harold had insisted on keeping when they updated their estate years ago. No sale, lease, or transfer of this property shall be considered valid without the notarized consent of Estelle M. Harmon, primary title holder. She ran her fingers lightly across the sentence, the paper cool beneath her skin. Her lips curved into something not quite a smile, something harder. Outside, a breeze picked up. The wind chime on the back porch rattled softly, its sound steady and unhurried. Estelle stood, pressed the folder to her chest, and walked slowly to her writing desk. She pulled out a sheet of paper and began to draft a list, the pen moving with certainty even if her hands ached. She wasn't going to raise her voice. She wasn't going to warn them. She was simply going to outlive their expectations and then dismantle them. The sun was barely brushing over the treetops when Booker Shaw pulled up the gravel drive in his aging Lincoln Town car, the engine rumbling low like an old man clearing his throat. Estelle was already waiting for him on the porch, her coffee steaming gently in a mug that read, "Don't let the gray hair fool you." She'd been awake since 5, not from restlessness, but from resolve. Booker stepped out, his wide frame unfolding slowly from the driver's seat. He still wore suspenders like it was the 1980s, and his fedora sat just slightly askew over his salt and pepper hair. His gait was slower these days, but his eyes, warm and hawk-sharp, missed nothing. He took one look at Estelle's face and didn't bother with pleasantries. "Let me guess," he said, mounting the first porch step. "They tried to push you out." Estelle didn't answer right away. She turned, pushed open the screen door with her elbow, and nodded toward the kitchen. "Come inside. Bring your appetite and your reading glasses." By the time they were seated, the deed folder lay flat on the table between them, flanked by a warm plate of buttered biscuits and 2 fresh cups of dark roast. Estelle wore her reading glasses low on her nose, but her voice was clear as a bell. "They think I don't know what forged consent looks like," she said, flipping to the second page. "Harold and I had this redrafted in 2004. We knew what family could do when money starts whispering in their ears." Booker leaned in, eyes scanning the text carefully. His lips pressed into a line as he reached the clause halfway down the page. "No transaction of this property shall be recognized without the notarized consent of the primary title holder," he read aloud. "That's you, still and only you." "They didn't even bother to check," she said, more disappointed than surprised. "Darren's been prancing around this house with couples like he's the rightful heir. Carla's listing is live, multiple showings booked through the week." Booker's expression hardened. "And you didn't give a single signature?" "Not one." Estelle sipped her coffee. "But someone did." He leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. "Then it's fraud." "I want to make it official," she said, already reaching for a second folder. "Amira Dean, that young attorney who helped the Donovans last year when their son tried to sell their rental behind their backs. I called her last night. She's taking the case." Booker let out a low whistle. "She's good. Ruthless in court, but patient with her clients. The kind of woman who'll read every word on every page twice and smile while she dismantles you." "Which is exactly what this situation calls for," Estelle said calmly. Outside, a delivery truck rolled by. She barely noticed. Booker tapped the deed with one finger. "You said Carla's listing is still up?" Estelle pushed a tablet toward him. "Active. MLS number still public. She's got 4 showings scheduled for this week alone, and the photos were taken while I was in the house. Look here, there's a picture of my piano in the background." "Jesus," Booker muttered. "They're listing a home they don't own without the owner's consent, and they're walking people through like it's a done deal." Estelle nodded, then reached into a third folder. "That's not all. I'm updating my will this week. I'm naming you temporary executor, just until things settle." Booker blinked, caught off guard. "You sure about that?" "I am," she said. "I trust you to act on my behalf, and not just because we used to trade mystery novels back in '98. A soft chuckle escaped him despite the tension in the air. "And if I need someone to escort a cease and desist to that brokerage office," she added, "you're tall enough to make them read it." Booker smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I'll wear my court shoes." A silence settled between them, but it wasn't heavy. It was focused. The kind of silence that comes after a decision has been made and before a storm officially begins. Estelle stood, walked slowly to the window, and looked out toward the detached garage apartment. The wind moved the branches just enough to send a dappled light across the driveway. She could almost hear Harold's voice in the back of her mind, low and steady. "Read every line, Estelle. The trick's always in the fine print." The doorbell rang at exactly 10:59 a.m., 1 minute earlier than the showing was scheduled. Estelle didn't flinch. She'd already put on her cardigan, brewed fresh coffee, and arranged her reading glasses on the end. Table just so. The house smelled faintly of lavender and old cedar, the way it always had, though Estelle had opened every window to let in the crisp spring air. She wanted the place to smell like it was still hers, because it was. The knock followed, polite but insistent. Estelle reached for the cane she didn't truly need yet and walked slowly to the front door. Through the leaded glass she could see the silhouettes, young, polished, hopeful. A man in a sports jacket, a woman in jeans and a blazer, first-timers again, the kind who still believed in fresh starts and granite countertops. She opened the door with a smile that was neither forced nor warm, just calm, prepared. "Good morning," the woman said brightly. "We're here for the 10 o'clock showing. Carla scheduled us." "Yes," Estelle said, stepping aside to let them in. "I imagine she did." They crossed the threshold hesitantly, as if they knew something wasn't quite right but couldn't yet name it. The man's eyes flicked up the staircase, admiring the original banister. The woman took in the fireplace with its carved mantel and framed photos that hadn't been staged or curated, but lived in, real. Estelle followed behind them, not looming, just present. "I hope you don't mind that I stayed in," she said, her voice pleasant, steady. "You see, I still live here." The woman turned, her brows pulling together. "Oh, we were told it was vacant." "Occupied," Estelle said gently. "Legally and completely, and just so there's no confusion, I never signed a thing." They stopped moving. The man exchanged a look with his partner, his hand dropping from the hallway light switch he'd just tested. "I'm sorry," he said cautiously. "You're saying you didn't authorize the sale?" "I'm saying," Estelle replied, walking to her wingback chair and sitting with unhurried grace, "that if anyone told you this property was for sale without my notarized consent, you've been misled." The couple stood frozen in the center of the living room, their sense of excitement quickly unraveling into something more like discomfort. We had no idea," the woman murmured, genuinely flustered. "Carla told us. She said everything was cleared." "I'm sure she did," Estelle said, reaching for her cup of coffee. "Would you like to take a seat and read the deed together? I keep the original copy on hand, just in case." But they were already backing toward the door, polite smiles forced back onto their faces like masks they'd forgotten they were wearing. The man offered a quick, "Thank you, ma'am," while the woman added something about checking with our agent. Estelle didn't stop them. She simply watched as they crossed the porch and descended the steps, hands now tucked deep into their pockets, their earlier warmth replaced by an unmistakable unease. By the time Carla arrived, heels clacking across the pavement like she was walking into a courtroom instead of a house she didn't own, the couple was already driving off. "What the hell did you say to them?" Carla barked before she even reached the front door. "You had no right to interfere with a scheduled showing." Estelle didn't rise. She didn't even look toward the door. She simply turned a page in the novel resting in her lap and said, without venom but without apology, "I've been in this home longer than you've been married, Carla. You should have known better." Carla stormed across the threshold, face flushed and phone already in hand, as if one more call to the brokerage might fix what Estelle had just made impossible. Upstairs, soft steps moved across the landing. Tasha appeared, phone tilted slightly in her hand, its camera already rolling. She didn't say a word, just lingered in the hallway, quiet and still, capturing the moment like a documentarian rather than a teenager. Carla caught sight of her and paled. "Are you recording this?" Tasha blinked, gave the faintest shrug, and said nothing. From the kitchen, Estelle's phone pinged once, an alert from Amira. "Filed. Cease and desist has been delivered. MLS notified." 2 days after the cease and desist landed in Carla's inbox like a legal grenade, Estelle sat in the corner booth of a local bakery with a manila folder tucked under her arm and a slice of pecan pie she had no intention of eating. She had asked the couple, the same ones from the showing, to meet her in a public place. Neutral ground, no pressure, no tricks. The buyers arrived 5 minutes early. She liked that. They slid into the booth across from her, hesitant but curious. The woman clutched a small planner. The man carried a folder of his own, though he never opened it. "Thank you for agreeing to this," Estelle said, folding her hands on the table. "I know the situation has been unusual." The woman gave a tight smile. "We were surprised, to say the least." Estelle nodded. "You deserve the full picture, not the one Carla sold you." She opened her folder slowly and laid the deed on the table, the notarized consent clause already highlighted. Then came the fraud complaint filings, clean, organized, and stamped with Amira Dean's letterhead. She didn't push them forward, just let them sit there, ready to be read. "We're not trying to cause trouble," the man said, adjusting his glasses. "We just wanted a fair deal." "And I'm not here to block that," Estelle replied. "I just want you to know what you were walking into. If you'd signed a purchase agreement based on forged documents, your title could have been contested, years of litigation, thousands in legal fees, and possibly no home at the end of it." The couple exchanged a long look. It was the kind of silent conversation people only have when they're already halfway to a decision. "Thank you for telling us," the woman finally said, voice softer now. "This could have ruined us." Estelle just smiled faintly. "You're not the ones who need to be ruined." The meeting ended with handshakes and honest gratitude. Estelle didn't look back as they walked out, hand in hand, already planning their exit from Carla's orbit. She didn't have to. By the time she got home, Booker was waiting in her living room, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. "They called me," he said, not bothering with preamble. "Withdrew their offer. Said they wanted it in writing that they're no longer pursuing any deal with Carla or Darren. Their brokerage's compliance team has already been looped in." Estelle exhaled, a quiet victory warming her ribs. Booker flipped open his notepad. "Now, let's talk offense." She sat down beside him, pulled out a crisp folder with her own scribbled notes. "I want to buy it. You already own it." "Not outright," she said. "The trust still holds the technical title. I want the clean transfer. Clear chain, no legal loopholes for them to sneak through later." Booker nodded. "We can move through Amira's proxy service. Keep your name out of the filings but secure full control." "And while we're at it," Estelle said, pulling out another slip of paper, "I'd like to place a quiet bid on Darren's home, not a flashy one, just enough to get on record, through the same proxy, of course." Booker paused mid-note. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." He chuckled low, then caught her expression and stopped. "You're not just going to stop the train, Estelle. You're going to reroute the tracks." "I'm going to build a whole new station," she said simply. Later that evening, Tasha found her at the dining room table, documents laid out like a paper battlefield, every line underlined, every margin annotated in pencil. She stood for a moment, watching the quiet determination in Estelle's movements. "Need a hand?" she asked softly. Estelle looked up, tired but clear-eyed. "You should be enjoying your summer, not elbow-deep in real estate law." Tasha shrugged. "I just dropped my minor in psychology, added legal studies. Think I need a different kind of toolbox." Estelle leaned back in her chair, assessing her like a general sizing up her new lieutenant. "Amira's looking for interns." "I already emailed her," Tasha said, lifting a folder off the table. "I'm in." The city records office was quiet that morning, cool, sterile, and humming with the soft flicker of fluorescent lights. Outside, spring rain tapped gently against the tall windows, and somewhere down the hall, a copier jammed and groaned. None of it touched the calm inside room 217, where Estelle sat opposite Amira Dean. Amira's suit jacket was folded over the back of her chair, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. She worked like someone who respected precision as a kind of weapon. Every clause, every comma sharpened to cut clean. Her keyboard clicks were quick but unhurried, each stroke confirming a step in the transfer that would shift the house back into Estelle's hands, this time completely, irreversibly. LLC is registered. Clean address, no name traceable to you or the Harmon estate, Amira said without looking up. Title transfer will file with the city by 3 p.m. today. You'll receive formal confirmation by mail and digital backup through the firm. Estelle nodded once. She wasn't used to silence meaning victory, but this silence did. It was the silence of systems working on her behalf for once, not against her. The check cleared 2 days ago, Amira continued. Wire went through clean, no flags, it's done in all but formality. Estelle folded her hands on her lap. And they still think it's moving under their timeline? Amira finally looked up. Her smile was small, dry, but full of satisfaction. Carla emailed yesterday morning about wallpaper samples. Apparently they're planning to modernize the dining room. Estelle gave a quiet snort. That wallpaper's older than their marriage. Down the street, Carla stood in the showroom of an interior design firm, running her fingers over fabric swatches, blissfully unaware she was decorating a house that no longer legally involved her in any capacity. Darren was on speakerphone, barking about fixture allowances, while Carla texted 3 different contractors, all of whom had been told the house was as good as theirs. The ignorance wasn't just satisfying, it was useful. Later that afternoon, Booker met Estelle at his office on the 2nd floor of a converted carriage house, his tie already loosened and his readers perched on the tip of his nose. The closing paperwork sat waiting on a polished cherrywood desk beside an open folder marked Harmon Transfer, Final Signature. Booker slid the last page toward her. All yours, he said softly. Estelle took the pen without ceremony and signed her name. No hesitation, no flourish, just the same steady handwriting she'd used to label Harold's old tax boxes. Booker watched her for a moment, then leaned back with a sigh. Feels good, doesn't it? It feels like breathing again, Estelle said, capping the pen. As she stepped out onto the porch of the office building, her phone buzzed once in her bag. She didn't check it. She already knew what it was. Darren. He'd probably just heard the sale was finalized. Maybe he thought it was time to gloat. His usual script when he believed the deal was sewn up. He always called right before contracts closed, like a child tapping the glass of a fishbowl to watch something squirm. Estelle let the call go to voicemail. She didn't owe him noise. That night the sky was clean again. The rain had moved on, leaving the sidewalks dark and shining beneath the porch lights. Estelle sat in her robe with her feet tucked beneath her on the couch when Tasha came in through the back door, holding a small brown bag and grinning like she'd just pulled off a heist. "Mint chip," she announced. "Your favorite. You own this house now. You get dessert first." Estelle arched an eyebrow. "Technically, the LLC does. Which you control." Semantics. "Power," Tasha countered, already digging out 2 spoons. They sat quietly for a moment, the weight of the day finally settling in, not as exhaustion, but as something steadier. Ground beneath the feet, a kind of earned stillness. Tasha nudged the bag toward her. "You know what this makes you, right?" Estelle shook her head. "Your own landlord." Estelle smiled slowly, then leaned back and looked around the room. Her room, just as the wind brushed against the windows like it had done for decades. The sound of unfamiliar voices echoed down the hallway, muffled orders, laughter too loud, footsteps too heavy for the floors that had known decades of quieter days. Estelle didn't need to leave the sunroom to know who had arrived. The rhythm of disruption had become its own kind of signal. She sat calmly in her cane-back chair, a china teacup balanced lightly in her hand, watching the morning light scatter across the garden through the wide bay windows. Her hydrangeas were beginning to bloom, deep blue this year, richer than the last. She'd watered them herself at dawn, steady and silent. In the foyer, Carla's voice rang out like she owned the place. "I want this wall gone completely," she told the contractor. "Open concept is key. The dining room needs to breathe." The man with the measuring tape gave a hesitant nod, glancing at the trim with a kind of reverence he didn't voice. "That's load-bearing, ma'am. Could take out the arch, but we'd need permits." "Figure it out," Carla said, breezing past him toward the kitchen. "We're bringing in quartz and brass. That dated tile has to go." She was in full stride now, texting one person, talking to another, juggling a coffee in one hand while her heels clicked across hardwood like a countdown clock. Estelle could hear every word, every confident assumption, every plan being made in the ruins of a fantasy Carla still thought was hers. She took another sip of her tea, unmoved, then the front door creaked open again. Booker's voice entered like a different kind of weather system, low, slow, and backed by legal weight. "I'm looking for Mrs. Carla Harmon," he said, letting the screen door slam just enough to announce he wasn't here to be polite. Carla poked her head out from behind the butler's pantry wall, still smiling. "Booker? What are you doing here?" He didn't return the smile. "Delivering a legal notice. You're trespassing. So are your contractors." The smile faltered. "Excuse me?" He handed her a crisp embossed envelope. "Immediate termination of all unauthorized activity. Cease and desist for misrepresentation of property ownership. Formal revocation of any implied or assumed contracts executed in bad faith." Behind her, the tile guy and electrician stopped moving. One set down a drill, another backed toward the door. "Where is Darren?" Carla snapped, her voice rising. "He said everything was clear. This is harassment." Right on cue, Darren stepped in through the side entrance, sunglasses on, phone in hand. He took one look at Booker, then Estelle emerging from the sunroom with a leather-bound folder, and his face clouded over. "What is this?" he said, loud and theatrical. "You don't even have the authority to issue—" Estelle cut him off simply by opening the folder. She didn't speak until she reached the middle of the room, flanked by sunlight and quiet force. "Here's the deed. Full transfer, recorded and filed. Here's the revocation of any previous estate-held interest. And here," she laid down the last page carefully on the console table, "is the cease and desist from Amira Dean's office. You'll want to read that twice." Darren scanned the first page, then the next, then back again, eyes darting like he was trying to find a loophole by sheer willpower. "You bought it?" he said, incredulous. "Technically, a proxy I control bought it," Estelle replied, "which is why you never saw it coming." Carla let out a disbelieving laugh, but it was too sharp around the edges. "This is sabotage," she said, stepping forward. "You lied to us. You set us up. We've already put down deposits, made calls, sent contractors. You're trying to ruin us." "No," Estelle said, folding the folder shut. "I'm showing you what it feels like to be pushed out of something that should have always been yours." Outside, one of the contractors started his van. Another walked off toward the curb, phone pressed to his ear, murmuring, "You didn't tell me this was under dispute, man." Inside, silence stretched like wire. Booker stepped forward, his voice calm but undeniable. "You'll need to vacate immediately. Any further entry will be documented and prosecuted under civil trespass." The first page Amira slid across her desk was printed in black and white, but it might as well have been fire. It was a scanned PDF of the forged pre-approval document Darren had submitted 3 weeks earlier. His signature was real. Estelle's was not. Amira tapped one corner with her pen. "He didn't even bother to fake the notary seal properly," she said, her voice dry and calm as a blade. "Copied an old template, didn't change the serial. It's traceable, instantly." Estelle nodded, her fingers folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't spoken much since the confrontation at the house. Now that the property was secured, her war had shifted, less noise, more precision. "And this," Amira said, pulling out a second folder, "is a full printout of the MLS listing Carla published, still active until 3 days ago. You'll notice the legal description they used matches the language Darren copied off the original deed, not the revised estate copy, which means they accessed your private trust documents without authorization." Estelle leaned in slightly. "Can we prove that?" "Already did," Amira replied, handing her a notarized affidavit from a former assistant in Darren's office who'd left just after Christmas. She confirms he opened the Harmon file without permission and discussed accelerating the handoff of the home. Her words. Outside the office window, storm clouds were gathering. Not metaphorically, but the timing felt poetic. A hard spring wind was sweeping through downtown Charlotte, scattering cherry blossom petals like a warning shot. Inside, Amira's office remained still, clinical, exact. Booker arrived 10 minutes later, rein on his shoulders and a thumb drive in hand. Got it, he said, easing into the chair beside Estelle. Forwarded all Darren's buyer emails to Amira, every one of them. Dates, times, and all the lovely little lies. He offered the drive to Amira, who plugged it in without hesitation. A file opened on the screen behind her, emails from Darren to at least 5 separate buyers, all implying sole authority to sell the property. No mention of Estelle or the consent clause. Estelle exhaled through her nose, calm but sharp. He knew exactly what he was doing. That's what makes it prosecutable, Amira replied. Intent and arrogance. 3 days later, a letter arrived at Estelle's door, hand-delivered by a courier from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. It wasn't hers to open, but she did anyway. She already knew what it said. To Carla Harmon, licensed agent number 1789437RE, Code of Ethics violation, formal complaint, number 239. A status. Active investigation attached was a second page, notice of immediate suspension of brokerage privileges pending resolution. Estelle read it twice, then tucked it into a folder marked Damage Phase 1. That same evening, Darren's name appeared in a digital bulletin on the board's disciplinary tracker. License under review, flagged. No details, just the beginning, but the kind of beginning that made brokers stop answering your calls. Upstairs, Tasha sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, laptop open, microphone plugged in. She spoke into the small condenser mic with a clarity and fire that didn't sound like someone her age. It sounded like someone who'd already lived through too much to let it repeat. My great-aunt Estelle has lived in the same house for over 50 years, she began. And someone who shares her last name tried to erase that history, on paper with a smile, and with a forged signature. The video would become her final ethics essay. But it was also something more. At the end, she panned her camera slowly across Estelle's living room, the old clock ticking, the framed deed on the side table, the woman herself seated beneath a lamp, quietly threading a new button onto an old cardigan. It was domestic, simple, indestructible. He asked to meet at the community garden. Neutral ground, he'd called it. Someplace quiet, someplace honest. But Estelle knew better. When Darren chose public spaces, it wasn't out of humility. It was damage control. He wanted her temper, her words, her power, constrained by politeness and proximity to strangers. He wanted a stage where he could be seen trying. She brought Amira with her. The bench they met on faced a row of planter beds filled with early spring collards and chives. Bees hovered lazily in the warmth. Somewhere nearby, children's laughter echoed faintly from a playground. The sun was high, but Estelle wore a wide-brimmed straw hat, the same one she used in her backyard, as if to signal, I'm not here for you, I'm here for the land. Darren stood when they approached. He looked older than he had even a week ago, drawn tight around the eyes, shoulders hunched as though bracing for a verdict. He wore a sport coat that didn't quite fit anymore and shoes scuffed from pacing. Thanks for coming, he said, voice softer than usual. Both of you. Estelle didn't reply. She eased herself onto the bench, nodding politely to Amira, who stood off to the side, arms crossed and unreadable. Darren sat down beside her, but not too close. For a moment, he watched the bees. I didn't know it would get this far, he said. We wanted to grow something, build something. Estelle's head turned slowly, her gaze steady. We? Carla and I, he said quickly. We saw opportunity. We didn't think... He stopped, swallowed. I didn't think it would hurt you. You thought I'd be gone before I knew enough to be hurt, she corrected, voice low and clear. Darren winced. I was trying to build a future, for all of us. I figured if the house was already going to come through the family eventually... She cut him off with a tilt of her head. Don't twist eventually into permission. A silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of Amira's pen clicking open, then closed. Darren looked down at his hands. You raised me, you know. After Mom passed, you let me stay in that back bedroom. You made me learn my multiplication tables on Sunday nights. Estelle's jaw tightened. And I would have given you this whole place one day. You didn't have to lie. You didn't have to sneak. He nodded, eyes glassy. I know. I just wanted respect, Estelle said. Not power, not control, just respect. Darren said nothing, but in his silence was a surrender. Amira stepped forward. We'll email the formal terms of withdrawal and remediation. If you're smart, you'll sign them. He gave a weak nod. I'll read them tonight. No, Estelle said. You'll read them carefully. She stood, slow but certain. The meeting was over. She and Amira walked away, their steps in sync, the sun behind them now. Darren stayed on the bench, staring at the planter beds like they might grow him something other than consequences. That evening, back at the house, Estelle sat at her desk when the email came in. From Carla Harmon. Subject, apology. It was short, not entirely hollow, but still vague, more about damage than remorse, no real acknowledgement, just a clumsy gesture toward resolution. Estelle read it once, then again, then clicked delete without replying. She opened a new browser tab, navigated to the local housing nonprofit she'd volunteered with on and off for years, Habitat of Charlotte. In the donation form, she filled out the amount slowly, deliberately. Then, under In Honor of, she typed, Carla Harmon, in acknowledgement of how not to treat a home. She submitted the donation, closed the tab, and returned to her crossword puzzle without breaking rhythm. The auction ended with a polite digital chime. No gavel, no courtroom, no theater, just a final green checkmark and a confirmation email routed through a shell LLC no one at the bank had reason to question. On paper, the winning bidder was an out-of-state entity focused on family investment trust realignments. In reality, it was Estelle. Booker called just after lunch. He has no idea it's you. Thought the bank was negotiating with a cash buyer out of Asheville. He even said it was probably some hedge fund trying to flip rentals. Estelle smiled faintly, stirring sugar into her tea. Well, he's half right. Something's about to flip. From his home office, Booker chuckled softly. I've never seen him that quiet on a phone call. Said he was hoping to counter but the paperwork already filed, and that the agent on record wouldn't return his call. They don't owe him anything anymore, Estelle said, and neither do I. An hour later, Amira finalized the transfer. The deed was processed through the proxy firm. The LLC assigned ownership directly into trust, not under Estelle's name, but under Tasha's. Quietly, cleanly, permanently. Tasha stared at the digital confirmation on her laptop like it was a map to another life. I own it? She asked, blinking slowly. You will, Estelle corrected, handing her the thick envelope with the original documents. Technically, the trust holds it. But you're the sole beneficiary. It's under your protection now. Tasha's hands trembled as she took the folder. But what about them? They're still living in it. Not for long, Estelle said, and not on their terms. That evening, just before sunset, Estelle folded a single sheet of cream stationery and slid it into a black envelope tied with a red silk ribbon. No return address, no instructions, just 3 words scrawled across the top in her looping, deliberate hand. Enjoy your last night. She drove herself. Didn't tell Booker. Didn't bring Tasha. Just a calm, private drive through a neighborhood Darren once bragged about upgrading. She parked at the edge of the cul-de-sac and walked to the porch in flats, unhurried, the envelope balanced between her fingers like an offering. No one saw her. She didn't knock. By the time Darren stepped out later to check his mailbox, the envelope was already waiting on the welcome mat, silent, elegant, and final. He tore it open, standing barefoot in the dusk, and for a moment the neighborhood was still, the kind of stillness that usually comes before storms. Across town, Carla was busy broadcasting her unraveling to anyone still willing to listen. Her post went up around 9 p.m., a long, cryptic tirade about betrayal, weaponized legality, and elder hypocrisy. Though it wasn't clear who the audience was anymore, the likes were down, the comments were sparse. One of her former colleagues replied with just a screenshot of the state licensing board website. Status, suspended, indefinitely. In the Harmon house, Estelle said nothing. She just turned off the porch light and went to bed early for once, the silence inside her chest finally matching the silence in her home. That weekend, while Darren paced and Carla packed with her teeth clenched, Tasha walked the perimeter of their now former backyard with her camera. No sound. Just grass underfoot. She was cataloging everything: the cracked bricks around the fire pit, the weather-warped tool shed, the swing still hanging by one chain. A future without ceremony. She didn't move anything in just yet. She just walked through, touching walls, testing locks, learning the shape of what was now hers. There were no pictures on the mantel, no flowers on the table. The echo of tension still lingered in the baseboards, but there was light through the front windows. And there was time. The string lights had been hung 2 nights before, woven through the porch railing and across the backyard like constellations laid down with purpose. Estelle had spent hours that afternoon arranging platters of deviled eggs, finger sandwiches, peach tea in glass pitchers, sweating over folded linen napkins. The tablecloth was the good one, the one Harold liked. She hadn't hosted a gathering in over 12 years. Now, her yard was full of voices again. Laughter rose and fell like the sound of wind through trees, gentle and close. Neighbors she'd known for decades strolled through the garden beds with drinks in hand, tracing her peonies with reverence. Some brought pie, others brought folding chairs. No one brought questions. Tasha floated between groups, offering refills and stories. She wore a pale blue sundress. Estelle hadn't seen before, her hair pinned back in a way that made her look older, wiser. She'd begun carrying herself like someone who held something sacred. Estelle sat on the porch swing, one palm resting over her knee, the other holding a chilled glass of sweet tea. The hydrangeas beside her glowed violet in the soft amber light. She was halfway through a conversation with Booker about porch repairs when the hum of tension crept into the yard like a draft under a closed door. A low murmur at the gate. Then a pause. Heads turned. A figure in heels and oversized sunglasses stood at the edge of the gravel path. Carla. Uninvited. Unsmiling. Unaware of just how unwelcome she was. The 2 volunteer ushers Estelle had hired, a pair of no-nonsense sisters from her book club, stood like a wall between her and the rest of the party. One extended an arm gently across the gate latch. "I'm just here to speak with her," Carla said, gesturing toward Estelle. "I won't cause a scene." "You already have," one of the sisters replied, eyes flat. "And you're not on the list." From the porch, Estelle caught her eye. Carla raised her chin a notch, defiant but weary. Estelle sipped her tea. "Must have gotten lost on the guest list," she said, loud enough to carry but soft enough to sting. The guests turned back to their conversations. Carla stood frozen for a moment, then pivoted, heels clicking back toward the sidewalk with clipped dignity. No one followed. Booker leaned over, raising his glass slightly. "To staying quiet," he said, "until the paperwork is ready." A warm chuckle rippled through the porch. Estelle tapped her glass to his with a muted clink. Tasha appeared beside them, holding a flat, wrapped rectangle the size of a serving tray. "For you," she said. Estelle opened the package slowly. Inside was a framed printout of the reversed title transfer, the final legal page where her name reappeared in bold, uncontested ink. Below it, Tasha had added a note in pencil. "You didn't just keep your house, you rewrote its story." Estelle touched the glass. "This," she said softly, "belongs in the hallway." Before she could rise, her phone buzzed once in her lap. A text from Amira. No words. Just a forwarded notification with the county seal at the top. Foreclosure notice, primary residence. Darren Harmon, status, active review, lien. Amount, $312,480.78. Estelle stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone face down on the table. Booker raised an eyebrow. "Bad news?" She shook her head, smile slow and cool. Just another plant that needed pruning. The trust papers were thick, heavy in Estelle's hands, stapled packets and tabbed signatures, inked stamps and numbered clauses. The kind of documents that could anchor a ship, or a family. She read each page in full. No skipping, no assumptions. Every line had been reviewed by Amira. Every clause designed with one purpose: to protect what she had already earned from those who once believed they had the right to take it. They sat together in Amira's office that morning. No fanfare, just clean light through tall windows and the quiet dignity of completion. Tasha sat beside her, elbows off the table, hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't said much, just watched, absorbing the significance like heat through skin. Estelle passed the final page to Amira, who stamped it with the authority only someone absolutely sure of their work can carry. Then she pushed a slim velvet folder across the table. "All yours now," she said. Estelle nodded, then looked at Tasha. "Hers, actually." Tasha's eyes widened. "Me? You're the trustee," Estelle said calmly. "I've named myself custodian for the remainder of my lifetime, but the trust is yours, both properties. One on paper, one in heart." Tasha swallowed, voice soft. "You don't think that's too much?" "No," Estelle said. "I think it's just enough. You won't sell it. You'll protect it. There's no back door written into this," Amira added. "No joint sale options, no third-party cosign. If someone wants to claim it, they'd have to go through you, and they won't succeed." Tasha turned to Estelle, eyes glassy. "This means more than I can say." Estelle reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "That's why I chose you." That same afternoon, Darren called. Twice, then again, blocked. His last voicemail came in through an old backup line Estelle hadn't used since Harold's pacemaker surgery. His voice was sharp but tight, like a man trying to pretend the building wasn't burning. "I just want to talk, about options, about fairness." She deleted the message without listening to the end. Later that evening, Carla submitted an emergency appeal to the state licensing board. The response came back the next morning. Appeal denied. Status, suspension permanent. Eligibility for reinstatement, not applicable. She posted nothing after that. At 10:42 a.m. on a crisp Thursday, Estelle pulled up to the Mecklenburg County Registrar's office in her blue station, a wagon. She wore a black wool coat, leather gloves, and her mother's brooch, the one shaped like a magnolia, the same one she wore the day she married Harold, and the day she signed her first library contract in 1971. Inside, the building was quiet. Neutral gray walls. The air smelled like paper and mild disinfectant. She waited patiently at the clerk's desk until her number flashed overhead. "Name?" the registrar asked. "Estelle M. Harmon," she said, handing over the completed trust documents and her photo ID. The clerk took them, scanned, nodded. "And this is your final confirmation of record transfer?" "Yes," Estelle replied. "In full. I'd like the original stamped copy notarized today." The clerk smiled, impressed. "Most folks your age let lawyers handle this step." Estelle smiled back. "I've handled lawyers. This part is mine." It took 22 minutes. At the final counter, she pressed her signature into the notary book with a silver fountain pen she'd brought from home. The letters were slow, but deliberate. Clear. Booker stood by the glass doors, hands in his pockets, waiting quietly. When she emerged with the folder tucked under one arm, he gave her a look that said more than words would allow. "You really did it," he said finally. "No," Estelle corrected. "We did." He reached out and gave her a tight hug, the kind that says, "I saw what they tried. I see what you built. You won't just last long," he whispered. "You'll outlast them." The envelope arrived late, tucked between a charity flyer and a water bill, its paper soft and off-white, like something from an earlier decade. No return address, just her name, handwritten in blue ink across the front. Estelle. Tasha was the one who found it. She stood at the edge of the porch holding the day's mail, the envelope resting uneasily on top like it didn't belong in the stack. Her face held a question she didn't ask. Estelle took it without a word, her eyes scanning the handwriting. Familiar. Still too tidy for sincerity. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon oil and dust. The windows were cracked open for the spring air. Estelle walked slowly to the fireplace, turning the envelope over in her hand once. Then again. "You going to read it?" Tasha asked gently from the doorway. Estelle didn't look back. "No." She bent down, opened the iron grate, and laid the envelope directly onto the ash bed. She struck a match without ceremony. The flame caught the corner and bloomed upward with quiet resolve. Tasha didn't speak. She just watched the flame consume Darren's handwriting, the loops, the false grace, the guilt she hadn't asked for. The envelope curled into ash. No message, no answer, just heat. Estelle stood, brushed her hands on her skirt, and moved on. That evening, the house was unusually quiet. No news on, no jazz records spinning, just the sound of Estelle climbing the attic stairs slowly, one step at a time, until she reached the cedar-lined room she hadn't opened in years. Tasha waited downstairs, unsure if she should follow. 20 minutes passed before Estelle came down again, arms full of old wooden frames wrapped in cloth. Some bore glass cracked from age, others were just the backs of old photo mounts, torn, yellowed, forgotten. She laid them out on the dining table like patient file folders. One by one, she opened each. She set aside the photos that no longer deserved wall space. Darren at 12, smiling in a paper Burger King crown. Carla holding a wine glass in front of the fireplace she once tried to list as a tear-down opportunity. They weren't destroyed, just removed, archived, in a box labeled simply "Done." In their place, she dusted off the pictures that had lived too long in storage. Her sister laughing on the porch in a denim dress, Booker and Harold hammering fence posts in the backyard, a photo of Estelle herself in front of the house during the snowstorm of '89, scarf pulled up to her cheeks, eyes crinkled in joy. By nightfall, the hallway was full again, walls lined not with obligation, but with chosen memory. Later that week, a local historian dropped by the porch with a clipboard and a camera. "Your home's on the nomination list," he explained. "We're putting together a walking tour, homes with stories that reflect the neighborhood's resilience. Yours made it through a lot." Estelle raised an eyebrow. "You got all that from property records?" "No, ma'am," he said with a smile. "From neighbors." She let him take the photo. Just the front porch in full bloom, framed by lilacs and legacy. Inside, Tasha stood at the kitchen counter, highlighters strewn across her open textbooks. She had enrolled in her first real estate law seminar. 4 weeks early. The professor had waived the credit hour limit after reading her essay on elder title fraud. She hadn't asked for special treatment. She just showed them the truth. Estelle walked past her and rested a hand gently on her shoulder. "I've been thinking," she said. "You should start drafting a workshop. Something simple. Local. You want to teach it with me?" Tasha asked. Estelle smiled. You'll teach it. I'll sit in the back and raise my hand when you miss something." They laughed quietly, then went back to work. The folding chairs filled slowly at first. A few cautious attendees trickled in with clipboards and canvas totes, their sneakers squeaking softly on the church basement's polished linoleum floor. Most were older, gray at the temples, wary in posture, but they leaned in as they took their seats. Curious, ready. The flyer had simply read, "Protecting your property, what every homeowner over 60 should know." Speaker, Estelle Harmon, hosted by Tasha Dean. Estelle stood at the front of the room, her reading glasses looped on a chain around her neck and a yellow legal pad in her hand. Behind her, Tasha adjusted the small tripod that held her phone, camera trained and recording. "Good afternoon," Estelle began, her voice steady but not loud. "I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a politician, but I've lived long enough to know when someone's trying to take something that doesn't belong to them." A low hum of agreement rippled across the crowd. "And I've learned how to stop them." She launched into the anatomy of deed fraud, what it looks like, how it starts, what signs to watch for. She talked about forged signatures, pressure tactics, the danger of letting family or friends review legal paperwork unsupervised. She passed around copies of fake consent forms and showed how to spot an altered notary seal. But it wasn't fear she dealt in, it was clarity. "This isn't about being paranoid," she said, pointing to the wall behind her. "It's about being prepared." By the time the session ended, 2 pages of sign-ups had filled with shaky cursive and block letters, neighbors, parishioners, even a retired school principal who hadn't attended a workshop in 20 years. Tasha pressed stop on the camera, eyes shining. "Did you get it?" Estelle asked. "Every second," Tasha said, "and it's already uploading." They hadn't planned for it to go viral, but by midnight the video had 8,000 views. By the next morning it had 42,000. The caption, "She lost her house, then bought it back. Now she's teaching us how," seemed to strike a nerve. By Friday, the local news station sent a crew. They interviewed Estelle in her backyard, beneath the string lights that still hung from the last gathering. She wore her porch hat and her courthouse coat. They called the segment, "How One Woman Bought Back Her Future and Taught a County to Guard Its Own." She didn't ask for the attention, but she didn't hide from it either. That week, Booker offered the second floor of his law office for free monthly sessions, the Harmon Series, they called it, legal literacy for seniors, led by Tasha, moderated by Estelle. Flyers went up in libraries and grocery stores. The waiting list grew. Meanwhile, the echoes of old harm thinned out. Darren's name appeared one final time in a property transfer notice filed 2 counties west, a smaller house, an anonymous LLC, a half-hearted second act. "Fresh start," the document read in the comment field. Estelle didn't comment. Carla resurfaced briefly in a rental application flagged by a friend of Amira's who handled tenant screenings for a property management firm. The application was rejected without explanation. No license, no leverage, no sympathy. Estelle hung no banners, made no calls. She just baked a new lemon chess pie and started keeping her curtains open again. That Saturday, after the workshop, Tasha found her at the hallway wall of framed photos, the archive of survival. "Can I add something?" Tasha asked. Estelle nodded. Tasha pulled a new photo from her backpack, a screenshot of the workshop video, paused mid-frame. Estelle, standing tall at the podium, glasses on the tip of her nose, one hand resting on the edge like she was anchoring the room. Tasha slipped it into the last empty frame. "You gave the house back to yourself," she said. "Now you're giving something bigger." Estelle stared at the photo. Not of who she'd been, but who she'd become. Outside, someone was ringing the doorbell. She and Tasha turned to look at each other, then walked slowly, side by side, toward the door. By early June, the house no longer looked like a place where a battle had been fought. The paint was new, not trendy, just bright. Light sage in the living room, a soft cream in the hallway. Booker had insisted on professional help, but Estelle chose the color herself. She said she wanted peace, but the kind that's been earned. Gone were the filler photos and old mismatched frames. In their place, sunlight poured through the front windows and struck the polished floors without interruption. Potted ferns lined the base of the stairs. A hanging pothos now cascaded from the ceiling above the reading nook. Even the hydrangeas outside bloomed like they knew the pressure had lifted. In the corner of the living room, a glass shadow box held 2 items, the original cease and desist letter and the official dismissal notice from the final court filing. Beneath them, the notarized title transfer, flipped, final, untouched. Amira had framed the papers herself, gifting them with a bow and a dry little note attached. "For your records. And your legend." Estelle didn't smile when she opened it. She breathed in deeply, as if the weight of the frame confirmed what her body had known for months but hadn't yet admitted. It was over. On the sideboard sat a small wicker basket. The last few envelopes from Darren and Carla, forwarded mail, loose apologies, one unopened check labeled partial reimbursement. Each one had been returned, unmarked but unmissed. Tasha dropped them off at the post office that morning. "Back to sender," she'd said. "No forwarding address." That same week, Tasha walked across the stage at commencement, honors cord draped across her shoulders, real estate law certification tucked beneath her diploma. Her professors clapped louder than most. So did Estelle, who stood in the back of the auditorium, arms crossed, eyes brimming, saying nothing. After the ceremony, Tasha handed her a handwritten note. "I want to teach with you. Same room, 2 chairs, 1 mission." Estelle didn't reply with words. She just folded the note, tucked it in her purse, and squeezed Tasha's hand tight. 2 weeks later, the dining room smelled of bergamot and almond scones. Estelle's tea service sat polished and waiting on a lace runner she hadn't used since Harold's retirement party. She had invited only women, no guest list, no program, just a note in each mailbox. "You fought, you won. Let's sit a while." They came slowly, neighbors, nurses, retirees, a few women in loafers and cardigans, a few in bright lipstick and old protest shirts. They brought cookies, memories, and the kind of nods that said, "I know what it took for you to invite us here." Estelle moved through the room like a curator, topping off tea, asking after grandkids, accepting hugs without flinching. In her home, there was no pity left, only reverence and quiet authority. Halfway through the afternoon, she tapped her spoon to her glass. A clear note rang out. "I don't give speeches," she began, "but I do believe in honoring a moment when it arrives." The room hushed. Every eye on her. For years, I let a lot of things go unsaid, some from politeness, some from fear, but mostly because I thought I had time. She paused, hand resting lightly on the back of her chair. And when someone tried to take my time, from my house, from my story, I realized I had waited long enough. She lifted her glass slightly. "So here's to staying silent, until you're ready to speak loud." Chairs shifted, a few hands wiped at eyes. Someone whispered, "Amen." Estelle sipped her tea. At the back of the room, Tasha leaned against the doorframe, a stack of new flyers in her hand. The next workshop series would be co-taught. The first topic, Power of Attorney Scams, What Your Grandchildren Should Know. Outside, the afternoon sun slanted across the porch. On the window panes, no fingerprints. On the walls, no shadows, just light. The couple arrived just after 6. They were the same ones from the very beginning, the would-be buyers who almost inherited a lie. Now, months later, they stood nervously at the edge of Estelle's porch, a manila folder in the woman's hands, a hesitant hope in their eyes. Estelle opened the door herself. "Come in," she said simply. They stepped inside, careful not to track in the early summer dust. Tasha waved from the dining room table, where she was organizing color-coded folders labeled Chain of Title, Beneficiary Structure, and Fraud Indicators. Estelle led them to the living room, where a large binder sat open on the coffee table. It was marked in careful tabs. Some red, some green, some gold. "Thought you might want to know what the real paperwork looks like," she said, gesturing for them to sit. "This is how you read a title." The woman leaned forward. "We don't want to buy anything right now. Just understand what we almost signed." Estelle nodded. "That's more valuable than a down payment." For the next 40 minutes, she walked them through every page, deeds, revocations, transfer authorizations, and the tiny places where wrong intentions hide in plain typeface. She spoke plainly, the way one speaks when knowledge is protection. When they left, the woman hugged Estelle without asking permission. "You're the reason we didn't lose our future," she whispered. Estelle didn't argue. She just turned on the porch light behind them. She left it on every night now, not as an invitation but as a statement, a soft, unblinking signal. This house is not empty. This house is still watched over. That same week, Booker came by with 3 cardboard boxes and a grin that didn't quite hide the weight beneath it. "I'm retiring," he said, sliding the boxes onto her dining room table. "Figured. It's time someone else handled the fights." Estelle raised an eyebrow. "And you think those someone else's are me and Tasha?" "No," he replied. "I know they are." Inside the boxes were annotated case files, bookmarked legal texts, and a hardbound copy of North Carolina property law, case studies and interpretations. Inside the cover he had written, "You don't just win battles, you rewrite the rules." Estelle touched the inscription with one hand. "You sure you're done?" He gave a slow nod. "I want to see what peace looks like." Later that night, Estelle and Tasha met with Amira by video call. The screen glowed between them like a lantern in a forest. "I've drafted the paperwork," Amira said. "Tasha is now co-trustee on both titles." Tasha blinked, stunned. "Officially? Filed and approved." Estelle leaned back in her chair. "Now you don't just inherit it, you help guard it." The next evening, Estelle sat on the porch alone, watching the light stretch long across the garden. The lilies were blooming again. A dragonfly hovered near the bird bath. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed, and a screen door clattered shut. She looked down the street like someone who had outlived noise, outlasted bad faith. Across the lawn, a wooden sign now stood staked near the sidewalk. It wasn't fancy, just clean block letters, carved and painted by hand. Not for sale, not for taking, not for forgetting. The sun dropped behind the rooftops. Porch lights blinked on, one by one. She stayed on the swing a little longer, her glass of tea sweating beside her, her feet planted firmly on the slats below. The breeze was mild, her house quiet, her legacy locked. She glanced at the sign once more, then said aloud to no one, "They thought I'd be gone by closing day." I stayed long enough to watch them leave instead.